𝒂𝒊𝒂𝒔 was a skilled and respected doctor. He had spent many years helping people and saving lives. Today was a special day for him. He had just completed a difficult surgery, one that many thought was impossible. But with his steady hands and sharp mind, 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 had done it. The surgery was a success, and he felt a deep sense of pride and relief. To celebrate, he decided to treat himself to a nice dinner at a high-end restaurant in the city. He put on his best suit, the one he wore only on special occasions, and drove to the restaurant. The place was elegant, with soft lighting and the sound of gentle music playing in the background. As 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 walked in, he felt a sense of accomplishment. He was ready to relax and enjoy a well-deserved meal. But as soon as he stepped inside, something felt off. The hostess at the front desk gave him a strange look, one that was neither welcoming nor warm. She hesitated for a moment before asking for his name. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 politely gave it, but the look in her eyes didn't change. She scanned the reservation list, her eyebrows furrowing slightly, as if she didn't believe he belonged there. When she finally found his name, she forced a smile and led him to a table near the back of the restaurant, far from the other diners. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 noticed that the tables closer to the entrance were occupied by people who looked different from him. They were dressed in expensive clothes, laughing and chatting without a care in the world. He wondered why he was seated so far away but didn't say anything. He just wanted to enjoy his meal. As he sat down and looked over the menu, he noticed the staff stealing glances at him. The waiter who came to take his order seemed nervous, stumbling over his words. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 remained calm and polite, ordering his meal with a smile, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A few minutes later, he saw the hostess whispering to a man in a suit, who then picked up the phone. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 didn't know what was being said, but he could tell that it was about him. The man kept glancing in his direction, his face serious. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 tried to ignore it, focusing on the positive. He had saved a life today, and that was what mattered. But his peace was short-lived. Not long after, 2 police officers walked into the restaurant. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 felt his heart sink. He watched as they spoke to the man in the suit, who pointed in his direction. The officers made their way to his table, their faces stern. "Sir, may we see some identification?" one of them asked. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 was taken aback. He hadn't done anything wrong. Why were they asking for his ID? But he remained calm, reaching into his pocket to pull out his wallet. He handed them his driver's license, hoping this would be just a minor inconvenience. The officers examined his ID, then looked at him with a mix of doubt and suspicion. One of them asked, "What brings you here tonight?" 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 explained that he was celebrating a successful surgery, but the officers didn't seem convinced. They asked more questions about where he lived, what he did for a living, and why he had chosen this particular restaurant. It was clear that they didn't believe he belonged there. Other diners started to notice what was happening. Some of them whispered among themselves, while others simply stared. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 felt a wave of humiliation wash over him. He was a doctor, a man who had dedicated his life to helping others, and here he was being treated like a criminal, simply because of the color of his skin. The officers didn't apologize or offer any explanation. They handed back his ID and left him sitting there, his appetite gone, his night ruined. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 sat in silence, the weight of the incident heavy on his heart. He couldn't understand why this had happened to him, but he knew one thing for sure: this was far from over. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 sat at the table, his heart heavy with a mix of anger and sadness. The officers had just walked away, leaving him feeling exposed and humiliated in front of everyone in the restaurant. He could feel the weight of their stares, some full of judgment, others with a hint of pity, but none of them comforting. As he tried to collect himself, the waiter returned with his drink, but now the waiter's demeanor had changed. He seemed even more nervous than before, avoiding eye contact as he placed the glass on the table. "Is there anything else I can get for you, sir?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. He didn't want to cause a scene, but the humiliation was hard to swallow. He had done nothing wrong, yet he was being treated as if he were out of place, as if he didn't belong. All he wanted was to enjoy a quiet meal, but now that simple pleasure seemed impossible. The other diners around him were still watching. He could feel their eyes on him, and it made him uncomfortable. Some of them seemed to agree with how he had been treated, their expressions cold and indifferent. Others looked away, clearly uncomfortable with what they had witnessed, but unwilling to speak up. One couple near the front of the restaurant whispered to each other, glancing over at 𒂂𝒊𝒂𝒔 before returning to their conversation, a look of disapproval on their faces. Another man, sitting alone at the bar, stared openly at Dr. Marcus, his lips curled into a slight sneer, as if he found the whole situation amusing. But not everyone was so callous. A family seated nearby looked on with concern, the mother casting sympathetic glances in Dr. Marcus's direction. The father frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the way things had unfolded, but he remained silent, perhaps unsure of what to do or say. Dr. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to push the humiliation aside. He had faced challenges before, both in his personal life and his career, but this felt different. This was a blatant display of disrespect and discrimination, all because of who he was and how he looked. It cut deeper than he expected, and for a moment, he considered just getting up and leaving. But something inside him resisted. He had every right to be here, just as much as anyone else in that restaurant. Leaving would only give them what they wanted, proof that he didn't belong. So he stayed, even though his appetite was gone and the joy of the evening had been stolen from him. As the minutes passed, the restaurant slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the incident fading from the minds of most patrons. The quiet murmur of conversations filled the air, the clinking of silverware against plates signaling that life had returned to normal, for everyone except Dr. Marcus. He forced himself to take a sip of his drink, the cold liquid doing little to ease the knot in his stomach. He tried to focus on something else, anything else, but the memory of the police questioning him, the way they had looked at him as if he were a suspect, was burned into his mind. It was a reminder of the harsh reality he had hoped to escape, if only for a few hours. Dr. Marcus knew that this moment would stay with him, a painful reminder of how far society still had to go. But even in his humiliation, he felt a spark of determination. He had worked too hard and come too far to be brought down by this. He would not let this experience define him but instead use it as fuel for something greater. For now though, all he could do was sit in the uncomfortable silence, waiting for the evening to end. Dr. Marcus sat in his seat, still reeling from the humiliating encounter. The evening had taken a turn he could never have anticipated, and he felt a deep sense of loneliness in that moment, despite the crowded room around him. Just as he was contemplating whether to stay or leave, the restaurant door swung open with a soft chime. A man walked in, commanding attention without even trying. He was tall, well-dressed in a tailored suit, and moved with a kind of confidence that turned heads. His presence was magnetic, and it wasn't long before the entire restaurant noticed him. Whispers rippled through the room as people tried to place his familiar face, but Dr. Marcus didn't need to guess. He recognized him instantly, his brother Julian. Julian was more than just a brother to Dr. Marcus. He was a highly respected lawyer known throughout the community for his work in civil rights. His name often appeared in newspapers, and he was the go-to person for anyone seeking justice in the face of inequality. Dr. Marcus hadn't expected to see Julian tonight, but there he was, striding confidently through the restaurant, his eyes locked on Marcus. Without hesitation, Julian made his way to Dr. Marcus's table. The staff, who had been so cold and distant moments before, now seemed to recognize who he was. The hostess, who had given Dr. Marcus a hard time earlier, looked flustered, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and fear. The same man who had called the police now appeared unsure of what to do, his earlier bravado replaced by nervous uncertainty. Julian reached the table and placed a reassuring hand on his brother's shoulder. "Marcus," he said warmly, his voice carrying the strength of someone who had faced many battles and won. "I heard about what happened. Are you all right?" Dr. Marcus looked up at his brother, feeling a wave of relief wash over him. Julian's presence was like a lifeline, pulling him out of the depths of the shame and anger he had been drowning in. "I'm fine," Dr. Marcus replied, though his voice was heavy with the weight of the night's events. Julian turned to face the restaurant, his gaze sweeping across the room and landing briefly on the police officers who were still lingering by the entrance. They stood straighter under his scrutiny, realizing they might have made a grave mistake. Julian's expression was calm, but there was a steely resolve in his eyes that told everyone in the room he would not let this incident go unchallenged. "Good evening," Julian said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "I am Julian Marcus, a civil rights attorney. This is my brother, Dr. Marcus, one of the most respected surgeons in this city. I understand there has been some misunderstanding here tonight." The room fell silent. Even the waitstaff, who had been moving about nervously, stopped in their tracks. The diners, who had been watching the earlier confrontation with varying degrees of interest and discomfort, now found themselves caught in the unfolding drama. The police officers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to respond. The man in the suit, who had earlier been so quick to judge Dr. Marcus, shifted uncomfortably in his position by the bar, suddenly looking very small. Julian continued, his voice unwavering. It seems that my brother was questioned and treated unfairly based on assumptions that have no place in our society. I want to make it clear that this kind of behavior is unacceptable, not just to my family, but to anyone who believes in justice and equality. The words hung in the air, carrying a weight that was impossible to ignore. Julian's calm authority made it clear that this was no ordinary confrontation, it was a reckoning. He wasn't just speaking for his brother, he was speaking for all those who had been treated unfairly, who had been judged without reason. The police officers, realizing the gravity of the situation, stepped forward to offer an apology, but Julian held up a hand to stop them. "What's done is done," he said, "but I will be following up on this. We need to make sure that something like this never happens again to anyone." The officers nodded, visibly relieved that the situation wasn't escalating further. They mumbled their apologies, then quickly left the restaurant, their presence no longer necessary. The restaurant's atmosphere had shifted entirely. What had once been a place of quiet elegance had now become a stage for something much more significant. The diners, many of whom had been complicit in their silence, now looked on with expressions of respect and, in some cases, regret. Julian turned back to his brother, giving him a look that said everything without words. Dr. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude, not just for his brother's intervention, but for the unspoken bond they shared. It was a reminder that, no matter what the world threw at them, they were stronger together. "Let's finish this meal," Julian said softly, pulling up a chair beside Marcus. And though the night had taken an unexpected turn, Dr. Marcus felt a renewed sense of strength. He knew that, with Julian by his side, they could turn this moment of humiliation into a catalyst for change. As Julian sat down beside Dr. Marcus, the tension in the restaurant was palpable. The staff, who had previously acted with such indifference, were now scrambling to rectify their mistakes. The manager, a middle-aged man with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes, hurried over to the table, flanked by the hostess and the man who had called the police. "Dr. Marcus, Mr. Marcus," the manager began, his voice shaking slightly as he addressed the brothers. "I want to sincerely apologize for the way you were treated tonight. It was a terrible misunderstanding, and I assure you this is not how we typically operate." Julian's gaze remained steady on the manager, but his expression was unreadable. Dr. Marcus, still reeling from the events of the evening, nodded politely, though his eyes betrayed the hurt that the apology couldn't quite erase. The hostess, who had initially greeted Dr. Marcus with suspicion, stepped forward, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Dr. Marcus," she said softly, avoiding his eyes. "I didn't mean to make you feel unwelcome." The man in the suit, who had been the catalyst for the entire ordeal, looked especially uncomfortable. He cleared his throat before speaking. "I am truly sorry, Dr. Marcus. I didn't know who you were. It was a mistake, and I deeply regret it." Julian finally spoke, his tone measured but firm. "It shouldn't matter who my brother is. He deserves respect and dignity just like any other person who walks through these doors. Tonight, you showed him the opposite. Apologies are a start, but they don't undo the damage." The words hung heavy in the air, and the staff nodded in agreement, their faces full of regret. The other diners, who had witnessed everything, now looked on with a mix of shame and curiosity. The atmosphere in the restaurant had shifted from one of quiet discomfort to an uneasy reckoning. The manager, sensing the gravity of the situation, took a deep breath and addressed the entire restaurant. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, raising his voice so everyone could hear, "I want to publicly apologize to Dr. Marcus for the treatment he received tonight. What happened here was wrong, and we take full responsibility. This incident does not reflect the values we strive to uphold." There was a murmur of agreement from some of the diners, and a few even nodded in approval, but others remained silent, their expressions betraying their discomfort with the public acknowledgement of the situation. Julian watched the scene unfold, his expression unreadable. He knew that, while the apologies were necessary, they were not enough to erase the hurt his brother had endured. But he also knew that this moment, this public acknowledgement, was a small step towards something greater. Dr. Marcus, for his part, felt a strange mix of emotions. The apologies, though sincere, felt hollow in the face of what he had experienced. The public nature of the acknowledgement was meant to make amends, but it also served as a reminder of the humiliation he had suffered. Yet he knew that Julian's presence had turned this painful experience into an opportunity for something more, a chance to bring attention to a deeper issue. The manager, seeing that his words had not fully lifted the weight of the evening, turned back to the brothers. "Please, let us make this right. Your meal tonight is on the house, and we would like to invite you back as our guests any time." Julian nodded, but his expression remained serious. "What's important is that this never happens again to anyone. I hope you'll take steps to ensure that your staff is trained to treat all your guests with the respect they deserve." The manager nodded quickly, eager to show his willingness to improve. "Absolutely, Mr. Marcus. We'll be reviewing our policies and conducting sensitivity training immediately." With a public apology complete, the restaurant slowly began to return to a semblance of normalcy, though the undercurrent of the evening's events lingered in the air. The staff retreated, visibly relieved that the worst seemed to be over, while the diners resumed their conversations, though their voices were quieter than before. Julian turned to his brother, his voice softening. "How are you holding up?" Dr. Marcus offered a small, weary smile. "I'll be all right, thanks to you." The two brothers sat in silence for a moment, the bond between them stronger than ever. The night had taken a toll, but it had also brought something important to light. Dr. Marcus knew that the journey ahead would be long and difficult, but he was no longer alone in it. And as the evening continued, the weight of what had happened began to shift. It was no longer just about the humiliation of one man, it was about the need for change, for understanding, and for a world where no one would have to endure what Dr. Marcus had faced. In that realization, there was a glimmer of hope, one that Julian and Dr. Marcus both knew they would carry forward. In the days following the incident, word spread quickly. What began as a humiliating experience in a restaurant became a viral story that captured the attention of people far beyond the city. A fellow diner had discreetly recorded part of the confrontation and shared it online, where it quickly gained traction. The video showed Dr. Marcus being questioned by the police, the awkward apologies from the staff, and Julian's powerful defense of his brother's rights. Social media erupted with discussions about racial profiling and discrimination, and people from all walks of life weighed in, sharing their own experiences and expressing outrage at the way Dr. Marcus had been treated. The hashtag #StandWithDrMarcus started trending, drawing attention from news outlets and influencers alike. Dr. Marcus was initially overwhelmed by the attention. He had never sought the spotlight, preferring to focus on his work and his patients. But as the story grew, he realized that this was an opportunity, one he couldn't ignore. The incident was painful, but it had also opened a door for meaningful change. With Julian by his side, Dr. Marcus decided to step into the public eye. He began speaking out about his experience, not just to share his story, but to highlight the broader issues of racial injustice that still plagued society. Interviews, articles, and speaking engagements followed, each one amplifying the message that what had happened to him was part of a much larger problem. Dr. Marcus used his platform to advocate for reforms in how businesses and law enforcement handled situations involving race. He collaborated with civil rights organizations, working to implement training programs aimed at reducing bias and promoting equality. He also started a foundation dedicated to supporting those who had experienced similar injustices and providing scholarships to young people pursuing careers in medicine and law. The response was overwhelming. People from all over the country reached out to share their support, and donations to the foundation poured in. What had started as a night of humiliation had turned into a powerful movement for social justice. Dr. Marcus's voice became a beacon of hope, inspiring others to stand up against discrimination and fight for a more just world. The restaurant where the incident had occurred issued a public statement acknowledging their mistakes and committing to better practices. They invited Dr. Marcus to return, but he politely declined. His focus was on the future, on making sure that no one else would have to go through what he did. As the movement grew, so did the impact of Dr. Marcus's message. He became a symbol of resilience and change, proving that, even in the face of adversity, one person's courage could make a difference. To all who heard his story, Dr. Marcus had a simple message: let's turn pain into progress. Together, we can build a society where everyone is treated with the dignity and respect they deserve. And so, the story of Dr. Marcus, the night he was humiliated, and the powerful movement that followed came to inspire countless others. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps spread these important messages and keeps the conversation going. Thank you.